The staff of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com join WVUA 23's Jen Chapman at Will Hagen's Grill and Tap Room for an in-depth analysis of the Crimson Tide and SEC football. This is Tide Sports TV.
Welcome into Tide Sports TV, live from Will Hagen's every Monday night at 6 p.m. It's in conjunction with the Tuscaloosa News, TideSports.com, and WVUA 23. This is Iron Bowl week, so we are going to be talking Alabama and Auburn. Kicking things off for the big picture is Cecil Hurt from the Tuscaloosa News. The first thing we're going to go over before we get to the Alabama-Auburn game is what we learned about Alabama against Charleston Southern. So, Cecil, let's start us off there. What did you see about Alabama that maybe we didn't already see so far this season?
Well, I think what you're looking for in that game isn't so much, who plays well or who you certainly got to see some younger players, but it's whether they can keep their focus, keep their intensity level high, which I thought they did a pretty good job of doing. So, if they do that, then they're going to win that game easily, as they did. But it's important down the stretch of November to not have a letdown, not lose sight of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And so I thought that was the main thing that came out of that game.
Last week when Saban went off, I felt like it was almost more for the players just to kind of reiterate that they can't let down, like you just said. What impressed you the most about that first quarter, putting up 28 points and just all sides of the ball contributing?
Well, again, they just seemed to execute well. Charleston Southern was overmatched, but Alabama didn't get a lot of foolish penalties. They were able to run the offense, I think, pretty much in the way that they wanted to. The defense clearly had worked on the option enough to be able to stop it. So, again, it's just a performance level and an intensity level. It's not the highest that it's been this year. It wasn't the same as an LSU game. But it was a performance that was focused, and they were able to go out and win.
Yep, the focus on point, and that's where they'll need to be this weekend for the 80th edition of the Iron Bowl. How does Alabama match up against Auburn?
I think Alabama's defense versus Auburn's offense is a mismatch. Alabama's just too good defensively. Auburn's defense, they're pretty good. They've done some good things. Carl Lawson's healthy. It helps give them a really quality pass rusher. They'll stack the box, try and stop Alabama from running the ball, try and make Jake Coker beat them downfield, same way LSU, same way Mississippi State, same way Charleston Southern did. You can't just let Alabama have six guys to block and give the ball to Derrick Henry, or you'll never get them stopped. So Auburn will do that, take some chances, bring some guys forward, and Alabama will have to make them pay going vertically down the field.
Today and pretty much all week, we'll hear from the players and coaches about what makes this rivalry so special, many of them calling it the best in the country, the best amongst all college sports. For you, you've been covering Alabama sports for 33 years. In your opinion, what makes this rivalry so special?
Well, certainly for people who are in the state, it's a 365-day-a-year proposition. I think that people who come from out of state to cover it or to watch it don't really grasp that. They don't understand that it's just as important as people on the 4th of July as it is on Thanksgiving. So there's that aspect of it. Both teams, they've generally been very entertaining games, very respectful games. You don't see a lot of jawing or fighting or cheap shots on either side. So I think that that's something that helps the players respect the game. And they've both been quality programs and for a long time. And, Alabama's certainly had more success than Auburn has, but Auburn's had tremendous success too. So you have to respect that.
So for Alabama to have success this weekend, what's going to be a key to getting the victory?
Well, you've got to make some of those plays downfield in the passing game that I talked about. Don't turn the ball over. Be solid in special teams. Don't get discombobulated if Auburn runs one or two trick plays. Stop the run. Be able to run the football. The classic things that always win football games, and Alabama's shown the ability to do that. So they just have to play to their potential and do it.
And Auburn's been inconsistent this season on offense, showcasing two quarterbacks. Coach Saban saying today they're preparing for both quarterbacks because they don't know who they are going to be playing. What would it take for Auburn to pull off the win?
They'd have to get some turnovers. Alabama would have to short field it for them some. Alabama would have to struggle on offense, which would mean Auburn playing well on defense. It's always a 50-50 proposition. The defense does well and the offense doesn't do well. So they'd need to make sure and score touchdowns instead of kick field goals if they can get to the red zone. And definitely, Auburn will have to eliminate their own turnovers, particularly the interceptions in the passing game.
All right, before we leave the Iron Bowl and go to the bigger picture, just want to ask you, what's your favorite Iron Bowl memory?
Oh, that's hard to say because we're there working. We're not there trying to pull for one side or the other. The 1985 game was a great classic game, came down to a last-second field goal. There have been some others like that. The one 2 years ago, if you're an Auburn fan, that's probably one of your favorites with the kick six play. So I don't know that I have a favorite memory or a favorite game. You just like to see kids that you've covered since junior high, in some cases, go and have success, and you like to make deadline.
And this is why people like Cecil Hurt so much. That answer right there, perfect. Looking at South Carolina losing to the Citadel, Florida and Georgia both barely getting wins, just eking them out against teams that really should have been bigger wins in some respects. Is the SEC down this year?
Well, I think it is a little down. I think the East is down. But at the same time, those games are the same problem that we talked about Alabama and Charleston Southern. It's really hard if you're in South Carolina's position. You've got an interim coach. You've got no bowl game. So it's really difficult to get yourself up and focused for a game like that. Whereas for the Citadel, that's an in-state school playing against the state flagship university. It's kids who feel like they have a chance. And you take advantage of some turnovers. Again, turnovers made the difference there, almost made the difference in Florida Atlantic. And that's what can happen. It's the exact paradigm. Some of the teams who played out of conference, Alabama, Auburn against Idaho, Kentucky against Charlotte. Charlotte's not a very good team at all, but Kentucky showed up, played well. Some of the others, as you mentioned, South Carolina got beat. Florida, Georgia, both taken into overtime. A week before, Texas A&M beat Western Carolina, but didn't look particularly sharp doing it. So it's just a matter of being able to motivate yourself and be focused.
And potentially, should Alabama win this weekend, they'll meet up with Florida in the SEC championship. How do you see that one kind of shaking out based off of Florida's last couple games?
Let's see Florida play Florida State. Let's see what their health situation is, how they respond in that game. Florida's a really good defensive team, so it won't be just a walkover for Alabama, but Alabama would be a 2-touchdown favorite.
All right, one more question before we let you go. Which playoff contenders does Alabama match up the best against right now?
Well, you're still talking about 10 or 12 teams, and I think Alabama would have a chance against any of them, regardless. That's what you have to do to be successful. You don't just get to pick your matchups. They have played fairly well against spread teams this year. If a spread team makes it, I don't know if one will. But Alabama is going to match up pretty well against anybody because they can run the football and stop the run.
I think they're well coached, and the defense is showing they can literally match up against any program. Well, that's all the time we have right now with Cecil. He'll be back on later in the show to answer your questions that you posted on the TideSports.com message board, so stay with us. We're back on Tide Sports TV, and now it's time to go inside the Tide, brought to you by Ziegler Meats. Joining me from the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com is Ben Jones. Ben, we're going to start with the younger players that got a chance to play in the Charleston Southern games. Which one stood out to you?
There were a lot of guys who got in the second half, and a couple of them who even got in towards the end of the first half.
Please just say Bo Scarborough, because we're going to hear about him later
Bo
on.
Scarborough. Bo had his first career touchdown, as did Damian Harris. I thought both the running backs were at least serviceable, and I think it was pretty obvious that once Alabama got into the second half, it wasn't quite trying to do the same things as it was in the first half. They were playing a little bit more conservatively, wanted to get Cooper Bateman and some other young offensive players to work, but also trying to kind of shorten the game a little bit and make sure everything kind of wrapped up smoothly. I did think that Bo played well during the game. Damian Harris came off the bench before him, and it looks like he's still probably the number 2 running back until Kenyon Drake comes back. But I thought that Bo Scarborough's performance was encouraging, certainly the most productive that he's been all year, and showed a really good knack for just kind of hitting the line and picking up the yards when they needed them to.
Which Kenyon Drake was going through individual drills today just with the cast on, so
yes,
that's positive.
Could be ready for Saturday. We'll see.
Damian Harris had that fumble trying to outstretch to get into the end zone. Is that just a a little too young? What was that? Because they immediately took him out.
I think a lot of young players try to do too much, try to go out and prove what they can do on the field. And in reality, I think it's important for some of the young players to remember that they've proven themselves to the coaches over the last 3 or 4 months at this point. That's the reason why Damien Harris was the first running back off the bench in this game. Not because of what he did in some of the other garbage time games that he got in necessarily, but because of what Alabama's coaches have seen during practice all the way dating back to fall camp. I think that obviously it's important to see what they do in a game, and seeing a guy like Bo Scarborough play well in that situation can help him and help coaches have more confidence in him going forward. But I don't think that there's anything to take away from that game that was a huge revelation that will necessarily change the depth chart or lead to a massive shakeup.
But those two definitely going to take on more significant roles next year, even though Derrick Henry's only a junior, most likely. 99.9% going to the NFL. So I mean,
I'm not asking him about it.
No, we'll wait till after the season. What would it take for an opponent to score more than 20 points on this defense? They are nonstop with the 3 and out. They can stop the run. They can stop the pass. What's it going to take?
I think one of two things needs to be able to happen. One, you either need Alabama to have a whole bunch of turnovers like they did against Ole Miss. 5 turnovers in that game, and I think Ole Miss ended up with 24 points off of those turnovers and 43 points total in the game. Anytime you're giving the other team extra possessions and giving them extra possessions on a short field, it's going to put your defense in difficult situations. And even Alabama's defense in that situation couldn't hold up the way that they'd hoped it to.
Doesn't it seem like that game was so long ago?
It does.
And almost
also,
like it's a different team.
It does, yeah. I think that Alabama was still trying to feel its way out and find its identity. This was, so early on. It was before Derrick Henry had kind of become the player who was getting 200 yards week in and week out. He had a really good game against Wisconsin, but obviously wasn't on track for the kind of season that he's having at this point, where he's breaking records up left and right.
So based off that, what part of the defense is still the most vulnerable? Is there a part of the defense that's vulnerable?
If I had to pick, I would say the secondary, but I don't even necessarily feel like the secondary is all that vulnerable. I just feel like the front seven is that much better than anything else. That's more of an appreciation of what the front seven has been able to do against the run and against some really good players and some really good teams than any sort of a slight to the secondary, to say that the secondary is the weakness.
And with the game that they had against Texas A&M, that secondary has so much more confidence now that those big plays are really limited at this point.
Right, those are guys who can make plays out there. Don't forget that Cyrus Jones has 3 punt returns for a touchdown at this point, and that's the most of anyone in the country. Minkah Fitzpatrick has 3 touchdowns on the season. That's more than some of Alabama's wide receivers have, the guys in the secondary.
I made a joke on Saturday on WVUA 23 that it wasn't even senior day, it was just Cyrus Jones day.
Yeah.
Like it just turned into him showcasing everything he's got.
More or less, yeah.
And you had a great article on him last week about how he handles Twitter and people that tweet at him, sometimes not positive things. He doesn't mind retweeting the unpositive remarks. What was that article like?
I think he kind of enjoys looking up some of that stuff. If you go and look at Cyrus Jones' Twitter feed, he can be a little bit difficult to find, but he's out there. He'll go ahead and retweet people who are critical of him that don't even tag his Twitter handle, people who are just talking about him, even media members or fans who are frustrated with him, fans of opposing teams. If he feels like someone is kind of slighting him, he's been known to call those people out and just kind of put them on blast to his about 12,000 followers or so. I think he thinks it's kind of fun, personally. I think he's a guy who has a lot of confidence and feels pretty good about the season that he's having. But I think that he's still a guy who looks for motivation everywhere he can get it. And if you're going to give him motivation on Twitter, then he's going to find it.
So if you haven't read that article, it was printed last week. What day was it?
It was on Wednesday.
On Wednesday on TideSports.com. Mm-hmm. Good one about Cyrus Jones and the way he handles Twitter. Let's move on to Jake Coker. How has he progressed throughout the season?
I think another big difference when you look back and you talk about how much the team has changed and grown since the Ole Miss game isn't just the role that Derrick Henry has, but the role that Jake Coker has. And I think that he's obviously much more comfortable in situations that aren't like the Ole Miss game, where he's not coming off the bench already trailing. When they're in a difficult spot and they need him to go no huddle or hurry up, like Alabama did for almost the entire second half against Ole Miss. I think it was midway through the third quarter when they started to go into their 2-minute offense and ran 100 plays in that game, which is more than they've ever run in the Nick Saban era before. He does a really good job at this point of distributing the ball around, getting the ball to Calvin Ridley. I think Ardarius Stewart kind of had a lull in the middle of the year, but in the last 2 or 3 weeks has really picked it up and been more of an important contributor on the offense. Richard Mullaney is obviously still a guy they throw to. Don't forget about O.J. Howard either. I think he does a good job of involving all 4 of those guys and also getting the ball to Kenyon Drake when he's healthy and out there.
And even Derrick Henry this past weekend. So
Yeah,
he's
been a
got-
while since he's had a catch.
There you go. So Idaho passed for more than 350 yards this past weekend against Auburn. So does this mean that maybe Jake Coker will pass a little bit more this weekend?
You know, it wouldn't surprise me if Jake Coker had a big day against Auburn's defense. I think that Jake Coker's career high is 262 yards, so it wouldn't surprise me if Coker were able to go out and pass for something close to 300 yards if that's what the game plan was. And you heard Nick Saban say after the Charleston Southern game that it was important for them to go and get some work done in the passing game and get some things kind of ironed out there. So maybe that's what they were looking towards. But at the same time, Auburn's defense also giving up about 4.5 yards a carry, about 181 yards a game on the ground. And I think that Alabama's coaches feel really good about any opportunity they have to get Derrick Henry the ball at this point in the season.
So at this point, which team has a better chance at getting a win against Alabama, Auburn or Florida?
I would actually probably say Auburn, just because it's a true road game. I think there are more strange things that can happen in a rivalry game like that. Florida, assuming that Alabama ends up getting there, which obviously the road would be much more difficult if they were to lose to Auburn. I think that Florida would really struggle because they don't have a quarterback. They don't have anyone who can really soften up the middle of Alabama's defense, who can attack the secondary. And I don't see Florida being able to run the ball on Alabama's defense. So for that reason, I just don't see how Florida could find the points. I think it would take a lot of strange things happening, but I think that might be more likely to happen in the Auburn game. Not that either scenario is going to happen, but I think that Auburn might
Watch
have a
out, fans.
slightly better shot.
And if you go off what Coach Saban said this past weekend, you're only as good as your last play. Auburn has been playing a lot better recently as compared to Florida.
Yeah, you know, it's really easy to remember what Auburn was doing at the start of the season when they were ranked in the top 5 and they were on national TV a whole lot. You know, I think they were in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game against Louisville that a lot of people saw Jeremy Johnson struggle. And Jeremy Johnson is a very different player than he is
They
now.
looked much better this past weekend.
Yeah, Auburn's entire offense is different than what it was to start the year. You know, not necessarily for the better with guys like Duke Williams gone, but I think they're playing more consistent. They have a better idea of what their players can do now, and they're putting those guys in those situations where they can perform.
Perfect. Well, when we come back, the guys won't be getting questions necessarily from me. They'll be getting them from the TideSports.com message board, questions that you tweeted at us or that you posted. So when we come back, we'll answer them. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV. It's now time to answer your questions that you posted on the TideSports.com message board or that you tweeted us at Tide Sports TV. The first one, did Derrick Henry's light load and fewer carries against Charleston Southern hurt his Heisman chances in any way? Let's start with Cecil.
Yeah, it just depends on what portion of idiots are voting. You know, I mean, if you don't know enough about football to understand that a star player against an FCS team isn't going to play more than a quarter, if you feel like it's necessary for him to carry the ball 35 times against Charleston Southern just to have some padded stats, he could have run for 350 yards if they had wanted him to. And if you don't know enough about football to understand that, you don't need to be voting for the Heisman Trophy or the Toyota Player of the Week or anything else. You need to stay in your mom's basement.
Last week on 99.1, I got asked if my goal of this show every week is to get Cecil to smile, and I said it doesn't matter because he makes me smile every week. And I think you just laughed. There we go. All right, let's go to number 2. What does Cyrus Jones' emergence as a punt returner with 3 touchdowns in Alabama's last 2 games mean for Alabama, and what other improvements do you see in special teams? Ben, we'll start with you on this one.
I think it makes for just kind of one more factor that teams have to prepare for. I think that certainly they would probably take a look at the punt return game in the film room every week. But based on what's happened in the last 2 weeks, you have to assume that teams will handle him differently at some point. You know, playing against FCS competition helps him. You could tell there was an athletic difference with Cyrus on the field compared to the defenders that he was running against on some of those returns. But it might make teams that be a little bit more likely to directional punt as opposed to trying to kick it high. It might make them more likely to try and kick the ball out of bounds, which could give Alabama, you know, maybe 2 or 3 more yards. On the other hand, it might mean that Cyrus gets to touch the ball less, which I'm not sure is what Alabama wants right now. It seems like he's kind of in a groove.
Cecil, send this one to you.
I think that all the return games have been better. I think Cyrus was heads up and alert in a situation for his first touchdown on Saturday. And you know, I think that he's come along fine. He's not, you know, certainly in the Alabama record books now. Alabama's had some great punt returners, but yeah, I think they're comfortable with him.
In our break, I asked our encyclopedia of knowledge over here, when was the last time that Alabama played an in-state school that wasn't Auburn? such as a Jacksonville State. And it was 1936, Howard?
Yeah, it was Howard College. They used to play them. Now Samford. They used to play them fairly regularly. They cut it out, and don't bet your mortgage on the year, 36, 38, right in that area. But it's been a long time since they've played any in-state schools.
And the reason we bring that up is because the third question was, should Alabama look to schedule in-state teams out of conference in the future? Because last week, Nick Saban says Alabama has to beg opponents to come to Tuscaloosa. But UAB, South Alabama, Troy, Jacksonville State, Samford would be willing to play here. So Cecil, is this something that could happen?
It could. I don't think it'll happen with any schools within the University of Alabama system. They could. Auburn's got a future scheduled series with Alabama State. But now, let's not pretend that those schools aren't going to want their payday too. They're not coming and not getting paid because they have to have those kind of games in order to make their budget, just like Charleston Southern does, just like the Citadel does, just like any Chattanooga or any FCS team. So the other thing, you look at Georgia Southern, you look at Florida Atlantic. You've got to decide if that's what you want to have to deal with on your schedule in terms of the motivation of the other team. So it could happen. I personally wouldn't have a problem with it, but I don't think it's anything that Alabama's looking at in the immediate future.
The other thing that makes the FCS scheduling challenging is that, especially for like Charleston Southern, they are getting ready for the playoffs. And when you play a school like Alabama, at what point do you want to sit your guys so they don't get hurt?
Yeah, but I think that one positive of scheduling an in-state school, especially one that is going to be of kind of a lesser level athletically from what you are, is that when you give them that money, you keep the money in-state. It goes to help another school in-state, which maybe in some small way could help the athletic department and lighten some of the load on the university there, which I generally think is a good thing, as opposed to making that school go out of state and have some of the more travel expenses. You might even have better attendance if you were to schedule a game like Samford or Jacksonville State, as opposed to Charleston Southern, which obviously has a lot further to travel. Not necessarily great, but I think that's one thing to keep in mind.
And how neat it would be for the players' families as well to get to see them play as well.
Right. Yeah, I wonder at what point in the Auburn-Jacksonville State game Auburn was saying, man, I'm glad we're keeping this money in state.
That's true, but I think at that point you have bigger problems than who you're scheduling and where they're located.
Like I say, it's fine with me if that's what they want to do.
I don't know if they're going to schedule them again, though. All right, number 4, other than Alabama, the best team you've seen nationally this season. Let's be quick with this one because we've got one more.
I think Ohio State is the most talented team. I'm not sure that's necessarily helped them all that much this season.
Yeah, it depends on how you define best. Oklahoma's very talented. Ohio State's very talented. Hadn't really seen a whole lot of Clemson. They're certainly good. Michigan State's certainly physical and a tough team. So those are some of the teams. But some teams just they have really good talent. And you'd say, why aren't they winning? USC's got great talent. LSU's got great talent, and you just wonder why it's not clicking for them. And some teams are fun to watch, like Stanford.
Final question. Who would you say is Alabama's defensive MVP this far into the season? I'm going to go with Reggie Ragland off the bat.
Yeah, I think Reggie's been good. Really, it's hard to single out a guy. Ashawn's had great games. Jaron Reed, Jonathan Allen. So you play as a unit, and it would hurt to lose any of those guys off that unit.
And I should say that last week, Denzel Duvall told me that Reggie Ragland is the commander-in-chief of the defense. So Reggie was pretty pumped to hear that today. Huge compliment there. Well, that's all the time we have for Tide Sports TV. You can tweet at us, Tide Sports TV, or post on the TideSports.com message board. And next week, we can answer your questions. Thanks for joining us.